You're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast. I'm your host, Shane Darby. Tony Deere, the golf writer, once described today's guest as the best golf course architect you've probably never heard of. Our guest today is Mike DeVries, who joins us from a snowy Traverse City in Michigan. He has fitted me in a few days before he is due to head back to the 7 Mile Beach golf course that he and Mike Clayton are building for Mat Goggin in Hobart, Tasmania. Needless to say, we do get an update on the 7 Mile Beach project and what it's like to work at Clayton's. We also get an update on the Addington project and learn of a covert and unexpected visit by Mike DeVries to Dollymount last summer. We delve deep into Mike's back catalogue and chatting about his early influences at Crystal Downs in Michigan, the early days with Tom Doak and Tom Fazio, and the faithful Mackenzie restoration that he undertook on behalf of the Meadow Club in California, not to mention the construction of Cape Wickham golf course on King Island, Australia. Along the way, he gives us an elevator pitch for golf in Michigan, explains the advantages pertaining to both benevolent neglect from a golf course perspective and indeed benevolent dictators in the Stuart Patton guise. Finally, he goes deep on his golfing bucket list and provides us with plenty of suggestions for augmenting our golfing libraries. It was great to have Mike on. I'm very grateful to him for his time, and we do hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Mike. You're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast.
Thanks for having me. You do a great job. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. Look, we've had Clates and we've had Punt. Now it's time to complete the triumvirate. It's great to have you on. I understand that I've managed to nab you just before you hightail it back to the 7 Mile Beach project in Tasmania. We will get on to a specific section of the episode devoted to Mat Goggin and 7 Mile. But in advance of that, I would suspect that you must nearly be entering the final straight from a construction perspective. Would that be the case?
Yeah, we've got 2 holes to complete as far as grassing, finishing irrigation, shaping, grassing, and getting them, so they're in the grow-in stage and things like that. Holes 3 and 4 in the routing, but those are the final 2 as far as just the construction sequencing.
Excellent. This may then be the final piece before the masterpiece is finished off, or do you expect further visits?
Well, probably have to go back later in the year just for some touch-up stuff, whether that's bunker edging, grassing, some final grassing tweaks here and there maybe. But as far as like big construction, main construction, certainly this is the final sort of trip for that, yeah.
So I suspect, and we will get on to the Cape Wickham project at King Island in a little while, but I suspect that the additional proximity to a city like Hobart probably recommends itself a little more than the relative isolation you must have experienced at Cape Wickham on King Island when you were there.
Hobart's an amazing city, and it's 250,000 people, state capital, so it's connected to all of the Australian capitals, as well as they fly to Auckland, New Zealand a few times a week, so it's technically an international airport, and so you get a lot more people coming in and out for a variety of reasons, because Hobart's just, it's a fantastic place, great food, museums, history, lots of great stuff. So, and the golf course is 10 minutes from the airport, so it's a very, nothing's easy in Australia for Americans because we're going halfway around the world, but thinking about that, it's very easy to get to. It's very accessible.
And look, as I said, we will get on to 7 Mile and King Island in due course, but I think probably Crystal Downs seems to be the most logical starting position for today's conversation. In preparation for today's recording, I was leafing through Joshua Pettit's Mackenzie Reader to see what you had written about the good doctor's course design output in the US Midwest. 2 specific...
Is this a test?
No. Just two specific things jumped out at me just initially.
Sure.
I was reminded about the joy that Mackenzie's coloured pencil drawings, golf holes, or routing illustrations engender. The sketches in question related to the 14th green at Crystal Downs and the 36-hole routing drawing completed on behalf of Ohio State University. I was also intrigued to understand Mackenzie was initially reluctant to visit the Crystal Downs site. However, once there, he was pleasantly surprised by the duneland that bordered Lake Michigan. I too was surprised at duneland bordering Lake Michigan. Is there much of it, and is there much golf on said dunes?
Well, there's a lot of dunes, and there's not very much on the dunes, unfortunately. I mean, it's just areas that are either remote. Crystal Downs is fairly remote, or it's, there isn't a large, it's just not a huge population, or it's difficult to do. The whole eastern side of Lake Michigan, which is probably 350 miles long, you have the southwesterly wind, so that tends to blow sand and create big dunes on Michigan side. Less so on Wisconsin, where there's a bunch of sand in Wisconsin also, but it's not necessarily right on Lake Michigan. Whistling Straits, the Straits course there, that sand was imported to that site because that was all flat clay farm field. So Pete Dye, that's a totally man-made deal. I mean, it's pretty amazing what he did there. Whereas on the Michigan side, we do have a lot of dunes that are natural and of varying sizes and shapes. Everything is big. There's Sleeping Bear National Lakeshore, which is just north of Crystal Downs, a few miles, and the lakeshore actually goes probably for 60 or 80 miles up the coast, and it's the 450 feet at its peak above Lake Michigan. So that's a pretty massive dune, and it's a phenomenal place. And the site of Crystal Downs was actually two farms, and the gentleman that founded the club, Walkley Ewing, he and his brother walked the western shore of Lake Michigan when they were teenagers in the early teens, 19 teens. And then as he got into the 20s and stuff, he was a developer. He lived in Grand Rapids, and he was involved in real estate. And he remembered this amazing site when they came up over this bluff and on these farm fields, and they had these views of Crystal Lake and Lake Michigan, and basically what the backside of Sleeping Bear is, as well as the Manitou Islands out in Lake Michigan. So it's a really unique junction of land and water and big dunes and ground that's really just totally compatible for great golf. And then on top of that, you bring in Mackenzie and his partner Perry Maxwell, who did the day-to-day construction. And you do that, and you stick it up there, and it's a sort of remote, unknown kind of thing for most of its life, most of the first 60 years of its life. Sort of known locally and regionally as this really great golf course, and it's just sort of a sleepy little summer place. And then it starts hitting the ratings, and now everybody's going there, and so it's a lot different than it was when I was a kid. I mean, it's a lot busier, and that's good from the standpoint of people are seeing it, but it's not like it was when I was a kid. My cousin and I were, I worked there and stuff, so we'd go out Saturday afternoon at 2:00, and front nine's wide open. There's nobody playing. It was just, and we'd buzz around, and we'd play in no time. 2:00 on Saturday afternoon, the whole front nine's full now. So no more quick rounds in the afternoon.
No, and of course you were fortunate insofar as, if I understand it correctly, your grandparents were members, yeah?
Yes, they were. I learned the game from my grandfather, and my grandmother played also. My grandfather played since he was a kid, and my uncle, my mom's younger brother, she was the fourth of five kids, and he was only 20 years older than me, and he was a scratch player, and he was kind of the cool uncle that was always around, and we were really close. So when I was real little, I had some sawed-off clubs that I would hit in the yard, and I just sort of fell in love with golf, and it was this cool thing that I did with my grandparents and my uncle, and had a bond with them, and played a little local 9-hole course, Frankfurt Golf Club, which no longer exists, unfortunately. It was a great place because I just got dropped off, and someone would be there like me, ready to play. And I would hook up with other kids or an old couple or whoever. And 2 hours later, someone would pick me up, my mom or my grandmother. And then when I got a little bit older, I would follow my grandparents around, and I would kind of, do whatever my uncle did. Where he landed near the green, I would put my ball and try and do what he did. And, because he was really good. So it was kind of this, it's just learning by, trial by error, and just, it was a great thing to do. And like going out with, my grandmother or my grandfather and playing 9 holes when I got a little bit older. And ultimately, when I was 12, we got a new pro. Fred Muller came in, and Fred was a really good player. And, he was only in his mid-late 20s at the time. So, he was a pretty vibrant guy. And when I was 14, I started subbing in the bag room and in the pro shop. And, so I sort of filled in when they needed somebody. And then when I was 15, I was there full time. And so I started learning about golf in a different aspect of it. And then the next year after that, I started working on the grounds crew. And by the time I was 17, we had a new superintendent that came in, actually a real superintendent that was trained and stuff, named Tom Mead. And he was a really excellent turf guy. And he was understanding about how you could do things more organically. Everyone talks about, pesticide free and things like that. He was trying to do that 40 years ago. And
Wow.
so I learned a lot about that. Started just working on the grounds crew full time then. Didn't work in the pro shop for Fred anymore. In fact, Tom was like, "No, I need you on the golf course. Tell Fred he can't work for him anymore." So I ended up doing that, and that was really I loved getting up early and mowing greens or cutting cups and raking bunkers, and I was done in the middle of the afternoon to go play golf or go sailing or something, or do other things. So it was a great thing just to sort of be there every day. And unbeknownst to that, when I was 17 or 18, I was sort of like, wow, this is a lot different than the little municipal golf course down the road, Frankfurt Golf Club, or in Grand Rapids, where I went to school in the other part of the year. And that sort of sparked an interest in that. And that's what I kept returning to. And that's kind of how I got into golf.
Following on, you graduated in business, and obviously you ended up becoming someone that the writer Tony Deere has described as the best golf course architect you probably never heard of. When did the penny drop with you that you might have a doubt or have somewhere in your future?
Well, yeah, I went to Lake Forest College, which is a small liberal arts school, and there were about 1,100 students at that time. And so I was a business major, but really I did all different kinds of stuff. I did a lot of math and science first couple of years, and the last couple of years I did a lot of studio art, and just had that sort of influence on me. And finished up, worked for a large sporting goods retailer called Herman's, which I figured out in about 4 months that really their mission and mine weren't in the same path for much longer. And that was good. And I went back up to Frankfurt because my wife and I, we were engaged and we were getting married. And so we quit our jobs in Chicago, and everyone thought we were insane. Why are you getting married? Well, this is the one. And, went back to the golf course and helped him out. And then about 2 weeks after that, talked to Fred and said, this is what I keep coming back to. And he says, well, do you know Tom Doak? And I say, who's that? Tom was doing his first golf course, High Point, which is now being resurrected, High Point 2. And Tom Mead, my old boss at Crystal Downs, was the project manager there. He had left Crystal Downs, and he was building that with Tom Doak. And so he said, give me a call and go check it out. So I went over there and spent the day with Tom Doak, and we went on our honeymoon. I came back and I started working for Tom, and I worked for him for about 2.5, 3 years, and finishing up High Point, but not really working on the design there or anything. And then was on the ground at the beginning down at the Heathland course at the Legends Complex in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and then came back to Michigan, where Tom's third course, the Black Forest, which is in Gaylord, Michigan, sort of north central, kind of a hotbed for development back in the 80s and 90s, where there were a lot of resorts and resort golf and stuff. And I ran that project. And then after that, we didn't have another project to go to, and that's when I went back to get my master's in landscape architecture and did that at the University of Michigan.
And I understand you did a bit of freelancing work during your postgraduate studies and ended up then working for Tom Fazio for a while.
I did. So when I finished up there, during the master's, it's a full-time program, but in the summer times, there were other projects and things. And so Mr. Fazio he was designing a course in the Gaylord area again. And he was the hottest guy in the business, really. You think about it. This is late 80s, early 90s. And one of the courses he did it's called the Fazio course, but it was a massive development that had a number of things. It initially started out with a course designed by Robert Trent Jones Sr. called Treetops, because it had this great undulation and elevation, and you could see treetops forever from this one hole they had. Mr. Fazio was building the second course, and again, Tom Mead, my old boss, he was managing the project for the Treetops owner and developer. So I did the finish work and the grow in seeding of it and stuff and teaching the superintendent how to do the grow in, and that sort of led me, meeting some of the guys from Fazio's organization. And when I finished my master's, they needed somebody on a couple different projects, and so I went and worked for Mr. Fazio, first at the course up in upstate New York, or as you would kind of call it, but it's Upper Westchester. And that was a very complex project and involved me being there sort of on site, helping coordinate everything with the construction team. And then I did that again out west for a course out there near Vail, Colorado. And that was about maybe 15 months plus or minus. And then since then I've been on my own and doing my own work.
When did you first get exposed to big equipment, dozers and excavators and that sort of stuff? Or is that something that you had an opportunity to do back with Tom Mead at Crystal Downs?
Well, no, I was on mowers and, regular maintenance stuff a lot, tractors and things. But no, the dozers and getting sort of into that happened really initially with Tom Doak. So when we went down to Myrtle Beach, I was essentially sort of Tom's associate on the project there. And, I had done lots of stuff, but I'd never been on a dozer or anything. And we had a little small D3, and Tom was using that to build bunkers. And there were the owner he had bought a bunch of these Fiat Alice FD30s, which is a dozer that's like the size of a D8. Anybody that knows, they sort of like categorize size. It's a really big dozer. And he had bought a bunch at auction, with the idea of fixing them up and flipping them and turning them and stuff. And so we just grabbed one of those one day. Tom said, "Here, I'll teach you how to run a bulldozer." And he's sitting in the cab there and telling me what to do, kind of. And this thing has got this huge blade. And, when you're first starting, you don't have any sort of feel to anything. And this thing is not it's not a smooth, it's not all the hydrostatic designs that they have now. Where
what you're saying is it's a pretty crude weapon.
It's crude. It's very crude. It's a large chisel. And when you make a mistake, you move about 10 yards of dirt and just make this huge pile, and you're bouncing all over. And so anyway, that's kind of, he just said, just mess around with this hill of dirt here, and get a feel for the machine. And then a couple of weeks later or something, there was this small dozer that we had, very tight, but still an old dozer. And he said, "Hey, you want to try, doing a couple bunkers?" So I built a couple bunkers, moved some dirt around, did that, just real rough. It wasn't finished or anything like that. But that was kind of my first foray into that. But I was really involved with doing other stuff. I was putting in drainage and things on the project. So then when we went up to the Black Forest, I was running the project, and I wasn't really on equipment a lot, but I occasionally, when we have a rain day or something like that, I would get on a dozer and build stuff and just, it's something that was sort of natural and it's fun.
In observing Graham Darcy of Dargov Construction, who constructed the CDP bunkers at Royal Dublin, I was struck by how mesmerising just watching the knuckle bucket and the excavator. It's almost like ballet with heavy machinery. I'm interested to understand how different bunker construction with a dozer versus bunker construction with an excavator and a knuckle bucket is.
Like, I can use excavators and things like that, but that hasn't been that's not my forte. I'm just, because I didn't, 40 years ago, we didn't build things really with an excavator. Guys are, sort of evolved into doing that and doing these real elaborate scapes and things like that. And I think there's a place for that. But also, like with the dozer, you need to tie everything in. Like, if you just think of a standard bunker, if you have a flat piece of ground and you're going to build a bunker, you got to excavate. You got to remove material, right? So there's a vacuum. There's a space that you make from that. And what are you going to do with that material? So if you think about just digging a hole and putting a pile next to it, like you did as a kid, pretty soon you get deep enough, the pile keeps falling into the hole, right? So, you can make really severe stuff, but you've got to get it to tie in and look like everything else or to fit to the landscape. And a dozer can do that a lot faster than an excavator can because it's working on a bigger scale and a bigger process. And that doesn't mean it can't be intimate or, very precise. It just depends on the size of the dozer you're working. So if you're on that big old FD30, your bunker is going to be huge. But, even with a small dozer, you can make big bunkers. And even if you have a medium-sized dozer, you can make small bunkers. It's just how you move dirt. So I think what I really learned about was how, observing guys and observing really good operators and how they took material and flipped it over to create, a plus and a minus. And the sum of those things together is more than equal to zero. I mean, you can make things better by doing it or tying it together and trying to make it look like it's always been there. And I find that's easier for me to do with a dozer because I can push the stuff that I don't want out of the way quicker. And then I can build a bigger landscape and tie that together. And in some cases, it depends on the situation. And typically, like, even though I can do 90% of the bunker with a dozer, post that, it's going to get down to doing some cleanup with an excavator, small excavator, or depending on the material and things like that, we can do that with a Sand Pro and with just a shovel and so there's still handwork that's involved. You still have to get in there and, the final details are, but there are guys that are really, really good with the knuckle bucket. There's a guy, Sammy, I'll call out from Labar Golf. Sammy's been working on different projects with me for, 15 plus years out in New York. And he was just a kid that was, he was just really adept at using an excavator. And he's not necessarily, like, someone wouldn't call him a shaper necessarily because he doesn't go out and do the whole thing, but he's restoring stuff and he's doing what the guy wants him to do. And he's been the best guy I've ever seen because I can do the shape there and he can clean it up faster than anybody I've seen. And then if I go, Sammy, just take, 2 more inches out, make the bottom a little more. He's just like, bing, and it's done. So he saves me a lot of time on a Sand Pro with a shovel. But you can do that stuff too. So just depends on the situation. It's There's a lot of talented guys out there. There's no doubt.
And what size of equipment are you currently using down in Hobart?
We've had a D4 and a D5 down there. So definitely on the smaller size. My preference is a John Deere 450, like an old JD 450. It's just the right size for me to create intricate detail and still be able to push a little bit of dirt. If you've got a place where you really need to push dirt, then you want to get into a D7 or a JD, 650, 750, something that has some more power to, like, just move earth for a while. You start with big stuff, and then you break it down. You get smaller and smaller and smaller until you're with the shovel and a rake. That's what you need.
As I said, we will get on to 7 Mile Beach in a little while, but I want to bring you back to the Meadow Club, and obviously that's a Mackenzie design in California, I believe. Needless to say, with your background in Crystal Downs, Mackenzie and Maxwell, if I'm right, you are currently the retained consulting course architect at Meadow Club, and you carried out a faithful restoration between 1999 and 2005. I understand that prior to the restoration, current superintendent Sean Tully suggested that historically the club had poured gravy all over their golf course. What specifically was he referring to?
Well, the interesting thing is, so that's the Meadow Club's first course that Mackenzie did in America, and he built the course in 27. It opens in 29. Of course, you have the big crash in November of 29, and they don't have any money. This is kind of a remote. Back in the day from San Francisco, this was a thing where people went up there for the weekend. They took a boat over and then, somehow got up to the Meadow Club. So you think about the Depression and World War II, the first 15 years of the club's existence, they had minimal staff, and the greens that were really quite large, like the 5th green was about 9,500 square feet, and it shrunk instantly to about 5,000 square feet. There were greens that were, half the size of what they were originally, because these guys were like, there's 2 guys out there. They're like, we don't have time to cut all that, so we're just going to do this little easy flat area, right? And they sort of left out a bunch of the really cool stuff. And essentially, 70 years later, that's where the club was, because post World War II, members played the golf course, and it's this amazing place and setting, but there wasn't an appreciation for Mackenzie's work, and nobody really knew what the original design was intended, kind of. The original founders were very clear about, they didn't, it's called Meadow Club for a reason. It's a high mountain meadow, and they were very clear that they didn't want trees planted. But then when he passed away, there were some people, and they're like, oh, well, we should plant some trees. And, of course, the nursery goes out of business, and they start planting trees everywhere. So that's the gravy, I think, that maybe Sean is referring to. But when I got there, Sean's predecessor, David Sexton, he had been there maybe 10 years already. And David is a very organized guy, super organized. And they had done a bunker project, but all they did was really replace the sand where the bunker was. And, it didn't take on any of the characteristics of Mackenzie. The bunkers had sort of deteriorated over the years and stuff. And we had some documentation, not complete documentation. And that led us into, really doing what they call the Mackenzie Signature Program, which was to bring back things. So we brought back the greens, the bunkers, mowing patterns, and that was the bulk of the work. And then since then, I still consult with the club, and we deal a lot with tree management, because the amazing thing is trees grow 3 or 4% in mass every year, and we're talking about redwoods and Monterey pines that were planted there. So 3 or 4% of a 50-year-old redwood is a good sized tree in the Midwest. They're big trees, and they cause big problems.
So I was interested to hear as well that when you lifted up the sod during work, you were able to find the original greens mix and where that was located.
Yeah. So what we would do is I would mark, where I felt the green was supposed to be. And when we cut that sod, because 100 years ago, they just sort of used the soil that they had there, and they probably screened it better than they do normal things, on the rest of the fairway or something. And we could see very clearly at the edge of the original green, it went from what was green to something that had small little pebbles in it. And when you cut something that's been maintained like that, those things start to show up. So if you had just took a core and you started to poke it and stuff. It wasn't like you were going to find like pure sand over here and then like native soil next to it. That's not really it. But that native material that they built the greens out of was just screened finer and didn't have those little rocks in it. So there were only about 4 spots where we were really off by more than 6 or 12 inches anywhere on that. And the second that we cut the sod where we looked at the expansion, we could know exactly where that was. So it's a very, very accurate restoration of what was there on day one, with the exception of the third green, which had been changed by the members in the 50s because of a structural issue.
And in terms of the club's historical archive, was that useful, or did you have to augment that with further research and finding new sources of information regarding what was there historically in terms of both plans maybe and aerials?
Yeah, they had some. It certainly wasn't comprehensive. Thomas's book had drawings of a few of the holes in there. Still to this day, there is no original drawing of the Meadow Club that Mackenzie did that we're aware of, for a full plan. The fortunate thing is they didn't do anything to the golf course. I call it benevolent neglect, where you didn't do anything. And in fact, that you didn't do anything means it's all still there in the ground. So that's why we can get the greens back out and be really, really quite accurate with where those perimeters were, and find that. We could find that in the dirt. So that was really quite exceptional. Tees, obviously you add lots of tees over time, and, you have different distances and things like that. And people have added back tees here and there for more length. That's a different thing though than the pure, green surface, or, the bunkers and getting the bunker. So we had some photographs and things that really showed us the detail in the bunkers, and the bunkering's a bit different than the sort of what people tend to think of Cape and Bay Mackenzie bunkers. There's all these sort of little nubs that, kind of wave in and out, almost like, little jagged teeth. So it's a bit different style and I don't know why that is. There's nothing written on that or why it would be like that. Maybe that's the influence of Robert Hunter and that being his first golf course. But I think it just was sort of particular to that place. And, maybe it was the crew that was there building it. I don't know.
Well, we will get on to the Addington and Moira Fabes, but there appears to be commonalities between the Meadow Club and the Addington in London. As you say, benevolent neglect, which can only be a good thing from an architectural perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's confession time from this side of the Atlantic. I've yet to play golf in the United States, so therefore I haven't played golf in Michigan. Obviously, a couple of year golf courses, Grey Walls, Kingsley Club and the Mines come well recommended, in addition to the likes of Belvedere, the Dunes Club, and of course Crystal Downs slightly further up the way. As you're a local, I wanted to tap into your knowledge base on Michigan golf. Perhaps you could give listeners a little elevator pitch for golf in your home state.
Well, number one, there's a lot of it. We have more public golf courses, I think, than any other state in the U.S. And that ranges everything from high-end resort courses down to the local mom and pop 9-holer that, they built on their farm. There's a lot of really good ground here. There's really good sand. We've got a lot of water, obviously, with the Great Lakes. So what happened, particularly sort of during the growth period, or even just back from that a little bit, a lot of times, a family would be farming and they're accustomed to building stuff, maintaining crops and things, and they're sort of getting towards their retirement or whatever, and like someone doesn't want to be a farmer anymore, and they're not really ready to sell, and all of a sudden they're like, well, let's make a golf course. We got one down the road, we can build a golf course. So we've got a lot of great golf courses, from things that are very inexpensive, might be 15, 20, $30 to play. It might not be world-class top 100 type stuff. But then on the other end of that spectrum, we've got a lot of really, resort courses. I mentioned a couple of those that, I worked at, the Treetops Complex up there, Boyne Mountain, Boyne Highlands. They have a number of golf courses involved with their deal. You mentioned Belvedere, which is a really awesome semi-private club. that's in Charlevoix, Michigan, and that's a William Watson design from I think 26 or 27. Maybe it's 24, but really, really cool green complexes and just a super fun place. It's noted, primarily as a place that Tom Watson played in the summers as a kid because his family used to come up here from Missouri. And it's also got some really, really excellent holes. The 16th being a short four that's noted by a lot of people as a great hole, and it is. But also, when you think about, there's a lot of really good private golf done by Mackenzie. Only did Crystal Downs and the Ann Arbor course for the University of Michigan, but Donald Ross, Willie Park Jr., a lot of the older established architects came and did that. You got Colton Allison. Allison was actually based in the Penobscot building in Detroit for about 10 years. So down near Detroit, there's a lot of really good classic old golf courses that are really fun to play. Now, some of those are very private. That would include Oakland Hills and Franklin Hills and a bunch of other ones. Indianwood is a bit different deal. It's sort of semi private. They've had some. I think there was a senior open, senior am. I think a ladies senior open maybe was there, but it's a really wonderful piece of ground also. And so there's a lot of really good stuff that you can get to, and all ranges of expense depending on what you want to do.
And how long is the golf season, Mike, in Michigan? You were mentioning earlier on before we pressed record that you've minus 10 Celsius outside and a foot of snow. So you're probably looking forward to getting back to Tasmania sharpish.
Right now, it's not the time to play. But on Christmas Day, I was in short sleeves, and some friends, we were over in Frankfurt, and these are old friends that grew up playing golf at Crystal Downs. So we just played one club, and we started near the fifth tee and just played cross country all the way to the far end of the golf course at 14 and our way back. It wasn't, there's no pins in, we're not hitting greens or anything. It's just going out for a hike and, having a little jab with your buddies. And, so there are people you can, it's not always horrible, but that wouldn't be typical. The typical, range, would be early April into November, and it just depends on those shoulder seasons. We had a really late fall this year, so there were a lot of places that were open in November and even into December. Public golf courses that they'd get a spat of weather and it's 50 degrees, and there's plenty of golfers that want to go out and play. Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, we're all in the same sort of northern belt where we're all under snow right now and it's sub-zero. But as far as golf participation, they're some of the highest in the country, and people play a lot of golf, and they get a lot in the time that they can, because it's really ideal. It's an ideal time of year to play.
The golfers in Ireland and the UK can be very fortunate that the Gulf Stream is in operation, because that's the very reason we don't have weather like you have, although being at pretty similar latitude. So we can hopefully look forward to that for many, many years to come. Come here, I wanted to take a look. We mentioned briefly Cape Wickham earlier on at the start. Just want to sort of tease out, it's a long way for a gentleman from Michigan to go to design a golf club. How did that particular commission materialize?
Well, this goes back 2011 or 12. I'm trying to remember exactly, but Darius Oliver and I had known each other for a long time, and he had mentioned something. He called me up and he said, there's this thing over here, and there's a gentleman that has found this property, and I think you should see it. And that was Andrew Purchase, who was in the golf business and golf maintenance business over in Australia, and he'd built a number of golf courses, high-end golf courses, throughout Asia, Australia, Middle East. And he had seen the site at Cape Wickham. He was over there on holiday with his boys and a friend and his boys. They were surfing, really. He's a big surfer. And King Island's got great surf. And so they were over there and they were kind of thinking about, oh, let's get what about a holiday place? Because it's a 40-minute flight from Melbourne. It's very close, real easy to get to, and, kind of remote enough and just really chill. And so he found a local guy and they were looking at properties. And of course, Dave Bowling, the guy that was helping him, said, oh, what do you do? It's, oh, well, I build, I'm in the golf business. Oh, you got to see this property up here. And so he took him up to Cape Wickham, and right away, Andrew just like, wow, this is like, and he bought the property. He's like, well, I don't know how it's going to happen, but this is like just way too cool. And so he had an Australian friend of his that had worked on projects, before, an architect, and he kind of did a quick routing and stuff. And Andrew didn't think it was using the potential of it. And that's kind of when, he had talked with Darius, and Darius said, well, it's a really complex site, but I think there's, half a dozen guys that would really do this justice. And, it is remote, so it's hard to make it profitable and all that. And Andrew he had no idea who I was, and he knew a bunch of the other guys on the list. And he said, well, I've worked with him. I don't, who's this guy? And so I went over on basically, Andrew paid me for, come over for a couple of weeks and to look at the property and try and, solve a bunch of the issues. And so I did that, and I basically, figured out a routing in that 2 weeks. And then there was a lot of work to do, beyond that. We had to, because we're utilizing Crown land all along the shore there, and you can do that. You can put a development application in to utilize that. You just have to make a point for it and stuff. And right now, it was just, at that time, it was just getting covered by cows there, and all they were doing is damaging it. And so it's not necessarily, they weren't necessarily doing, any good to it. So that took about a year to do. And Darius did a lot of that, working, getting all that paperwork and stuff in order and stuff. I wasn't even over there, during that. We kind of had the routing and knew where it wanted to go. And Andrew wasn't sure, he didn't necessarily want to be a golf course owner and do all that, on a day-to-day basis. And that's when he got Duncan Andrews involved as a partner, and Duncan became essentially the first owner. But Andrew Purchase was the guy that found it and had the vision of like, this is like so unbelievable. We need to build a golf course here. This is really, really amazing. And it is. It's phenomenal.
The geology of the site, I believe, is pretty spectacular as well. Sand-based, porous sand and limestone layer underneath, and then groundwater as well, just flowing beneath the surface. How unusual would the alignment of the planets in terms of sand, something that drains quite well, and actually having water there, would that be common, if you like? Two examples here in Ireland that come to mind readily are Portmarnock Golf Club, which has sand and then a porous layer of rock, and I think Royal Portrush as well. And I certainly know when the RNA lads come in to do their firmness testing, they can't quite believe how much water can be thrown on the golf course, and the firmness levels are just off the charts. I can imagine gets pretty firm in Cape Wickham as a result of the geology of the site.
Yeah, it's very firm, and it's all fescue, so it's through the greens and everything. So the texture and the playability of it's really quite compatible and works out really well. So King Island's this rock. And there's a bunch of different rock around there, but there is this limestone sort of underneath, and then there's sand on top of it. The whole western side of King Island is, again, the same kind of thing like we were talking about Lake Michigan. The winds are coming from the west and southwest a lot. It comes from all directions at King Island, but it really can blow that way. And so that has pushed sand up onto that western side of the island. In particular, and created a lot of dunes and, big heaving, rolling landscapes there. And so there isn't a lot of water. There's not a massive river or something coming through there like you see in traditional links, but there's smaller, bodies of water, and there's water that goes through the sand and then hits this limestone thing, and then it tends to work its way towards the ocean. And so they devised a way to sort of capture that, as well as there is a natural spring in the creek that comes down. And so we grab water from that and pump it to the site to utilize for the irrigation. It's the most diverse site that I've ever seen, for a golf course, just because we have, dunes, we have cliff top areas, we have rock that, is just hanging, and, there's tees right up against it. The waves rush into the rocks. You've got Victoria Cove with the sandy beach. It looks like the Blue Lagoon there with, you just need Brooke Shields out on the sand, you're playing by her. And the 11th hole is basically in the ocean. And, that's just really, really phenomenal that, it's this little sort of peninsula that kind of juts out there. And, the waves just roll into it. Now, the interesting thing there is that's a harder rock that's out there along that shoreline and makes all those cliffs and stuff. And it breaks the waves. The really big waves break out quite a bit further beyond the 10th hole and the 11th. And prior to us building anything, when I was first there, I remember looking from about 300 or 400 yards away through the valley. That's the 10th hole, which is the short par 4 that goes down between those hills. And I was looking at these big waves crashing in. And there was a series of 3 waves, and they're all breaking simultaneously. And I'm like, wow, those are really big. And I got down there, and they were like 12-foot waves. They were just crashing, but it doesn't crash into the shore. It crashes out, and then it sort of blows in that particular area because of the way the rock formation is out in the water. That takes all the energy and sucks it out. So it's a really phenomenal, unusual piece of ground.
It's on the list of places to visit the next time I go down there. I have got a couple of mates who've made it out. One that isn't particularly good on small planes. And I suppose the adventure, or the travel adventure that is getting to King Island, is via a small plane. So I suppose if you're that way inclined, maybe you might want to investigate whether there's a boat or something that can bring you instead.
Honestly, the small planes are fine. I mean, I'm a good flyer, but I've never had a bad one in or out. And that's like the 10-seater, even a helicopter once. And then, you have sort of, 20 to 35 seaters that come in pretty regularly too. We don't have the big jets aren't coming in there. And that's a limitation of the runway, the way it is right now.
Well, as somebody that's spent a significant amount of time on King Island, you're probably the best man to ask, how windy is it there? Recent dispatches from ranking people might have suggested that one of the reasons perhaps that the golf course fell out of the top 100 of Golf Magazine's ranking list was because of the inclementness of the weather that's encountered.
Well, you're in Ireland. Tell me how clement the weather is in Ireland at times, right?
Well, I'll give you an idea, Michael. Christmas Eve, playing in Royal Dublin on the 13th tee. This has never happened to me anywhere else. 6 club wind, and the wind managed to blow the ball off the tee. So I can't imagine it's any more windy than that.
Well, it does get very windy there, but I've seen it in all seasons. And certainly it can be, if you get one of those storms that comes through and hangs out for a few days, that's not necessarily pleasant. And if that is the only time that you're there and you don't have any exposure to anything else, I think you'd be like, wow, this is just horrible, right? Well, you'd have that if you walked in and that was your one experience at Royal Dublin. If you came in and played Royal Dublin only, and that was your day and you left and you never played anything else in Ireland, you'd probably be like, that's just horrible. Why would I ever go back there? I think that's the experience that some people have had. But I've, playing the golf course, I've played it, consecutively on several days. And I've played it in a gale force wind. I mean, literally, I used to windsurf, so I know what a gale force wind is. And it was completely playable. There's enough space. I lost one ball. I lost it it rolled off of the 18th green into the dune. And I was like, I'm just going to give that one to the gods. Cause I thought, I made it all the way around. I probably could have found it, but that wouldn't necessarily be prudent. And then, the next day I had like, a club and a half, maybe 2 clubs. And the next day it was a light zephyr. It wasn't even anything. Now, I'm also used to playing. Crystal Downs is pretty dang windy. A lot of wind comes across Lake Michigan, and it can blow. It can blow pretty hard from the north or the south at Crystal Downs. So my game sort of adapted to that. I mean, people are always sort of shocked. The first time I went to Scotland and I arrived and I was paired up with 3 students from St. Andrews, and I hit this low. Well, I topped one into the burn on number 1. Then after that, I hit this little chip and run, and it skirted and stopped. And they were like, "Wow, that was." They were sort of shocked. I did the same thing at the second hole. They're like, "Where'd you learn how to do that?" I said, "Well, I grew up. It's pretty windy too. My ball flight's low. Just by." So, maybe I'm accustomed to that, but there's, as an example, like during construction, the winter can be, quite, I mean, it's cooler, but it's not winter like we think of in Michigan, right? I got a foot of snow outside right now. And we had like really pretty good weather, and it turned into August, and all of a sudden we had 3 weeks that were, for the most part, were pretty bad. We could still do construction and things like that. That's not, but it wasn't pleasant weather. There was more heavy rain and more wind than sort of we had been experiencing. And all of a sudden that ended, and the next 6 days were glorious. They were 55, 60 degrees, minimal wind. I mean, this is in the heart of winter. Like, it's supposed to be really bad and unplayable. And, if you hit that in the middle of winter, it was fantastic. And that's the interesting thing about Tassie is it's a maritime climate. So it's never too hot and never too cold. Every time Clates would come down to Hobart in the winter, he'd be like, "Oh, it's horrible in Melbourne today." Comes down here, he's like, "Wow, this is pretty nice." He's looking around. He's like, "The sun's out. There's no wind." He's like, "What's going on?" So I go, "It's a normal day in Hobart." So I think part of the problem is like I was saying, if you went and played Royal Dublin only on Christmas Day and then you left and never came back, you'd think, well, that's just terrible. That's like totally inhospitable. And if you did that at King Island, you'd do that too. But like if you're making a golf trip and you go and you only go to King Island for one day and you get bad weather on that day, and then you're up in the Sandbelt and it's like pretty decent. You might get some windy. If you're going to go to the Sandbelt, you're going to be there for about a week. A lot of guys are there for about a week because there's a lot to do in the Sandbelt itself, down the Mornington Peninsula. It blows hard in the Mornington Peninsula. It blows really hard because it's coming right through the Bass Strait, same deal. So, is it as violent as King Island? I don't know. I haven't spent enough time, continuously in the Mornington Peninsula on that, but I've been down there when it's been blowing hard. I wouldn't say it's unplayable, but it's not necessarily pleasant, on certain days. So I think it's people are giving that a bad rap and saying it's unplayable, and that's just not true. Some guy put up, I can't remember, he put up some weather data and stuff, because someone said, well, it's a gale force, it averages a gale force wind, and that's just ridiculous. That's not true at all.
From one exceptional site in King Island to another, the Addington in London, I was lucky to get an invite from Ryan Nodes for a course tour back in August while in London. I'm sure many listeners to the show will have been keeping tabs on the work at Shirley Church Road since the project started. In a city with some exceptional sites for golf. And for those that haven't seen the site, or indeed seen the pictures, how would you describe the site and the golf course that's currently in the process of meticulous reinstatement?
It's eccentric. When you think about, it's got sort of more elevation, more hilly aspects than a lot of other areas around London. it's had it had this eccentric owner for a number of years, that was, sort of didn't do anything. So there was this benevolent neglect, as we talked about before. And I think the thing is that, there's this contrast of things where you have these, some flatter, more broad landscapes, and you've got these sort of big hills that you go up and over, or these deep ravines, and hence there's all these bridges that sort of make the walk a bit more palatable because of that. And because of the elevation, you also have now that we've peeled back the trees that had grown for 80 years, sort of untended, now you can see downtown London again, which is really incredible, just spectacular. You see the spire, you see the various sections of London from, several places on the golf course, which is really quite spectacular. And it's an unusual soil. It's a sort of a shaly, rocky soil underneath, so it drains really well, and sheds water really well. But it doesn't have a lot of topsoil, which is challenging at times for growing grass.
Ryan Nodes must almost be the ideal client. Discuss.
Ryan's awesome. He's super, super excited about, taking the Addington back to what it was, and reclaiming things. He's a very good player. He's well studied, and it's always good to have, essentially, a dictator, or, one person that you're dealing with versus a committee or 300 members that are all trying to, think that they know about this or that, when in reality they know their game, but they don't really have perspective. Nothing against golfers or people on committees or anything, but they have a perspective that usually is very narrow and not necessarily as broad as it needs to be. And certainly, we all have our prejudices. I think that's one of the good things about, the partnership with Frank and Clates, is that we all come to, this business from different backgrounds and experiences and level of play and things. Obviously, Clates, played the European Tour for 15 plus years and the Australasian Tours for 30, and he's a great player, and he understands the game on a different level than, say, Frank or I do in regards to that. And I think the combination of those types of things helps us understand and provide input to things that we're going for the same goal, and we're trying to find the same thing. And Ryan's looking for that also. So Ryan being a very good player, though, too, but being a course owner and manager, he knows that he needs to accommodate, the average guy also, even if his perspective maybe isn't as specific as maybe Frank's and Clay's and mine is with regards to that. So it's a really good combination of having a great owner, wants to do the right thing, is involved and wants to discuss, but is taking advice and processing that, and letting us do our thing.
So a significant portion of the restoration process pertains to vegetation management and obviously bunker renovation, which I know Conor Walsh and your arborists are addressing as the months tick by. You have undertaken a few cameo construction visits thus far to the Addington. I believe the first job may have been a practice chipping green, which I'm pretty sure incorporated an old wartime air raid shelter. And indeed, the fruits of your labour were in evidence last August with the new Part 3 with the devilish green, fantastic internal sections with precipitous drop-offs to the rear. What can you tell us about particularly that new Part 3 that you've reinstated?
So it was an original green. we don't know if it was an alternate green or if it was the original green for the 12th hole, the famous 12th hole, which is the big, they call it a long 4 or short 5, however, um, that goes down and then comes back up. And this green was to the left as you're playing the 12th hole, was to the left of that. And basically it was abandoned early on. We don't know the history of that. But it was evident in this old photograph from the opening of the golf course. And that had just been treed in forest for the last 100 years. And we found that in the forest, and like, wow, this looks like this is the green platform, and this is the knob that you could see in that photograph, and all that. So we cleared that area off, and instead of using it for the 12th hole, Frank came up with the idea of, what if we make a par 3 after the existing 9th hole down to this? We can use it as an alternate 19th hole, in case we're working on another hole, or as an alternate routing. Because what we could do then also is we could make the 10th, which is a short medium 4, into a par 5, into a short 5. And we could provide some variety to the golf course. And so Ryan was real excited about that. He thought that was quite interesting. The original clubhouse routing and the original routing of the golf course was supposed to start at the 5th hole, not at the current uphill first, which is a uphill par 3 for the first hole. It is a very unusual opening. But the 36 holes that the Addington had, there was another 36 across the road, or another 18, across the road during World War II. That got overtaken by the British government for housing and things. And so the clubhouse, its location where it is now, was not really the first intended clubhouse location. And Ryan is, he's looking at the potential of how we could restore the original clubhouse location and the routing, and that might actually make this alternate par 3 something that's an interesting alternative loop that's in the middle of the round, and then gives some variety to the 10th hole too, as a par 5, which plays actually quite well as a par 5. It's quite interesting in the terrain there. So it's a part of it was sort of discovery and trying to reclaim that, and then adjusting it a little bit. But the whole complex is very close to what was there. The drop off to the back right was there, and that hollow, and the big valley that's between the tee and the green, that was all there. So it was a really fun project, and I think people are going to be excited about it, because it's a different change of pace.
You mentioned the views of London earlier on from the Addington at the top of the hill there, and I was struck by those panoramic views of Wembley Stadium and the Shard, as you said, and the Millennium Dome, and that iconic backdrop of the Greater London skyline. How important do you consider these non-golf elements to be in supporting great golf? So the obviously this is the views are long views, are views of the general vicinity. You can't golf on them, but they obviously augment or certainly aid the feeling, certainly, or the connection with a great golf course to its hinterland and its surrounds.
Yeah, I think it's in this case, having the views of London, one of the great cities of the world, and all the history that's there. That gives you a sort of a sense of place. So, because everything around the Addington's fairly, it's pretty rural, a lot of it. And what the second golf course is now, it's parkland. There's trails through there and things like that, but there's no development over there. So it's got a very rural feel to it. And you have views north to London, but also you have views south because of the ridge that you're on. So I think those are important things that give you perspective on the golf course's sense of place, of where it is, and the bigger landscape around it. Some cases, those elements are things that you use on the golf course as targets or guideposts. You think about that, and if you're at St. Andrews, you can take note on the church spire or whatever, or think about how that is, and particularly when you're in a place where it's blind, and those are things you only get to know over time. In that case, we talked about Cape Wickham before, and so the lighthouse, it's 48 meters, 157 feet tall, and you can see the lighthouse from every hole on the golf course. Sometimes it's not right in your face, but it becomes really evident when you get on the fourth tee and you see the top half of the lighthouse sort of on the left side of the fairway, and it's a guidepost. So things like that, that's much closer than, say, London is. But I think those types of things are important. You don't have to do it all the time, though. I mean, I think if you have these high points, like at the Addington, you're looking at it from up where the fifth tee is, where the clubhouse originally was going to be. You'd have that view. So you could sit out on the patio and you could be, enjoying the immediate surrounds, environs that you have with the golf course. But then you'd also have the perspective of London in the distance. And that's got to be really different too. If you think about that in the evening, when the lights are coming on in London and you're sort of in this rural area, but you're seeing that in the distance, that would be a really spectacular sort of feeling also. So it adds to the golf. It's not necessary, but it adds to the ambience of a place, of the club.
The recurring theme in terms of these topics is great sites, and we're now going to get on to 7 Mile Beach, the job that you're currently doing for Mat Goggin down there. He strikes me as somebody that's cut off a similar piece of cloth to Mr. Nodes. Would that be fair?
Yeah, he's Matt's an unbelievable guy. He's he was a great player. He was a top 50 player in the world. People, the 2009. The interesting thing is the 2009 Open that Tom Watson almost won at 59. Matt was his playing partner on the final twosome, and on the 13th tee, Matt was, he was right there. He was tied for the lead, and I'm sure he would like a couple shots back here or there, and have an opportunity. But he understands the game on another level, which is really cool. He grew up in Hobart. So he has a great passion for Tassie, for Hobart. His former home, even though he lives in the States, has been in the States for the last 20 years or so. And he understands golf. He understands. He's also not an architect, so he's very involved. But he lets us do what we need to do. He does that with everything that's involved with the project, which is really quite amazing, I think. He shows a lot of perspective on that. He's known Clates for a long, long time, and me for less. Only a few years for me. But he knows how passionate I am and Clates is, and that we look at this as this really unique opportunity, and working with him on it and stuff is really phenomenal. So, I can't say enough good things about him. I've been very fortunate to have, good owners, throughout my career. Matt's right up there with the best of them, and he's a guy that's really passionate about golf and what it can do for kids. He's going to have this. This driving range is going to be, have at it, kids. Here's 4 bags of balls. Go learn the game. Go do this. Go chip and putt. He wants it to be that kind of place. That's really there aren't many owners, much less, that are going to allow that. That's a really cool thing, I think.
I think he seems to be trying to build a real legacy, and I guess a community resource offering career paths and paths to the sport, which is just so, as you say, quite unique.
It is. The grow the game mantra. Matt's, I mean, he's really doing that. He's not he's not a billionaire that's building this. He wants to build a great golf course and he wants to have a great place for people to go. But, for him, it's also about giving Tassie kids an opportunity to go and play and learn the game and do things. And how can that be positive on people's lives, even if they don't end up being professional golfers or going on to even high level amateur play or whatever, like he did before he became a pro. But it's giving them this thing, and that's golf is this very social game. We sort of lose track of that, and I think that's one of the great things about it. I mean, you go out with your mates and you give each other a hard time, and when they three putt it, you give them hey, nice jab there or something. It's all about having a little bit of fun, right? And but at the same token, you go places and you run into people. Oh, you're a golfer. You see a crest on their shirt or whatever, and it immediately starts a conversation, and all of a sudden you have this common bond, right? Oh, you're a golfer. You're a nut like me. Okay, good. So, I think we lose track of that a lot of times. It's supposed to be about having fun. It's not always about just punishing you. Like, not every hole is supposed to be totally brutal, but you got to be able to figure out kind of the puzzle. And if you do, then you end up having more fun with it, right? Especially if your friend that you're playing with and is your opponent that day hasn't figured out the secret to that hole.
Well, it sounds like keeping tabs on both Mr. Pont and Mr. Clayton, that your fellow partner, other than adding a couple of additional tees and alternate teeing areas and maybe alternate pars, I suppose what I'm getting at is, how are you enjoying working with Mr. Clayton on the 7 Mile project?
Oh, it's awesome because I'm there every day, and Clayton would be down there every other week for 2-3 days, and when you're away and things are happening and you're moving sand to fix this or that or build a green or tee or and you come back and you haven't seen it for 2 weeks. It's like when you leave your kid when they're 3 years old. Well, they you leave them for 2 days and all of a sudden you come back, they look totally different. They've done something that, like, how did I miss that? And so that's great because Clates comes in with a similar philosophy, but looking at things from a different perspective. And then he goes, I tell him about, okay, I've been doing this, and, I changed that, what we talked about last time. He goes, oh, I like that. What about this? And so he always is bringing in something that I didn't actually, necessarily see, and that's helpful. And I think the thing is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to the pinnacle, and we're working with each other to, just incrementally get a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And so having the time that we've had on this project to do that, because we have a small crew and, the builds, taking a bit longer and stuff, for a variety of other, the end of COVID and all this other stuff. That's been helpful, and it's helped the golf course to evolve. Not only does Clates find a zillion other tees for alternate shots, but sometimes I would just totally, I would just dismiss that. I mean, like, it's a bad transition. We're not walking over there. That doesn't work. We got to get a gear. No, we're not doing that. Come on, focus on this. And then, it might be that we keep looking at that. He keeps walking in the same spot or something. And that happened on the transition alternate tee for number 9. And it was always out of the way, and there was a big gully there and stuff. And what happened is the second green there, which was the original green, it ultimately started to shift a bit to the left for other reasons not related to this tee. And so when that happened, all of a sudden I built the tee, and Clates came back and I go, "You got your tee." He immediately went over and
That was one for him.
he started
Yeah,
like
yeah.
swinging this imaginary stick in his hand, and he goes, "Oh, this looks good. Yeah, I like this. This is, yeah, I like you
Yeah.
can't see much there. That's good." you know. So it's
Happy as a pig in shit.
exactly,
Yeah.
and sometimes things just work out, but as they should. It just takes time.
Yeah, yeah. It grew on you, and then you built it. Yeah, yeah. Come here. I believe you've had some water issues during growing. Poor old Anthony Toogood and his growing team have been presumably pulling their hair out. Has that been rectified, or have you had some more? Because I know Hobart's a very, very dry place just in general in terms of rainfall.
Yeah, it's surprisingly, when you think about Tassie, and everybody thinks it's cold and wet down there if they're in Australia proper, and it's not. It's a maritime climate, so it's very moderate. But there's a lot of variety on the island. The southwest portion of the island, which is basically uninhabited, and not there's no roads leading into it or anything. That's all protected World Heritage and national parks and things like that. Um, that whole section of the island is really close to temperate rainforest, um,
Uh-huh.
and but then the mountains just west of Hobart, Mount Wellington being the one right above the city at 4,200 feet. Um, that's just this big rain shadow then for Hobart. So Hobart's the second driest capital in Australia behind Adelaide, which is really unusual. You wouldn't think of that, and we're a little bit east of that, where the airport and the golf course is. So we're a little bit even more in the rain shadow, and for whatever reason, um, it's very dry there. There's a lot of groundwater, and that's where our irrigation's coming from. But the ways that we have to get that groundwater up is a bit complicated because we don't have power out there yet, so we have to use these big generators. Um, and we have a dam that we can fill, and put water in that we can draw the irrigation out of. So it's complicated. It's a little cumbersome because we don't have full power there yet. That's in process. It takes time, and some of that is a result of just bureaucracy, and some of that's it's COVID, and things just don't move as fast. And there's only 500,000 people in Tassie, so it's a smaller environment. It's not like Sydney or Melbourne where there's 5 or 6 million people and everything's right there, and you can get a guy to do it and get something to happen. So the ultimate long-term solution is that we get a recycled water line there, which is what Royal Hobart has, and the other golf courses that are near the airport. But that takes time to get it there, and it's a so that's going to be um, the best solution for it. In the meantime, we're dealing with big pumps and generators and things to get our water and do that for the time being. Um, it's also a bonus though too. Once the golf course is established, we have this dry, beautiful weather. Even the winter, which tends to be a bit less wind down there in Hobart, and we get wind, but it's not crazy wind like you'd see on the Straits up at Barnbougle or Wickham or at the Mornington Peninsula. What you see is um, it might be cold, even if it's like near 0 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius, like first thing in the morning. By 9:30, it's clear blue sky, sun's out, um, and it's 12, 15, 16 degrees Celsius, and it feels like it's 25 though because there's like no wind, and so I mean almost every day of the year is going to be golfable in Hobart at 7 Mile. I mean, it's really phenomenal. It's better than people think.
Um, Earlier in the project, I understand that you were holding some bulldozer masterclasses for Lucas Michel and Jurian van der Vaart. I've also heard that Lucas may now be putting that skill set to the test in somebody's back garden not too far away from Melbourne. What sort of studies were they? I believe you're a very good teacher, first of all, but what sort of studies were they in terms of how quickly did they pick up the main skills of coordination and the bulldozer becoming an extension of their hands and feet?
Well, it takes time, and when you're like, neither of them really grew up on equipment and stuff like that, so it's not, for some people it's more translatable. I'd been involved with tractors and mowers and things like that for a long time, and sort of accustomed to that type of thing before I got on, bigger, heavier equipment. So it takes a little bit of time. Some people are more adept than others are, obviously. Um, but I've got a sharp whip. I can get the boys moving. Um, but it's more than just, part of it's like learning to use the tool, right? So whether it's a bulldozer, a rake, a shovel, an excavator, a skid steer, which is the small little, some people call them bobcat buckets, things like that. Any of those types of equipment, your time in the seat is really valuable for learning how to do stuff. And so a lot of it would be like, hey, we just got to go push garbage there. We need to smooth out the road. You got to go work on the road and make it smooth. You just got to work at it. So it's hard work. It takes time. It takes time to do that. My son came over for a few months and worked with me too. And he's been around. He's seen this. He's been around it a lot and stuff like that. But he never worked on a construction project like this with me before. And he was like, "Oh, this is really frustrating." When he first got this, when you move the blade just a little bit wrong, and then you start getting this washboard up and down sort of effect, and it's like, "Oh, how do I fix that?" I was like, "Well, you got to work at it. You got to do a little bit, and then, you got to work it out a little bit more." So, it's good when you can have them there. It's not just theory, but when when they go through stuff, what you do is you try and, okay, you're getting a handle on what you can do with the tool. Okay, now you have to think about the bigger picture and what's happening, not just what's right in front of you, but how does that connect and interact with that bunker, that green, that hillside, that dune. That's not even on the golf hole, Mike. Why are we looking at that? Because that's all important, because it's still on the site, and it's still something that's prevalent in our vision or the purview of somebody who's standing there and just sort of enjoying the environment that they're in, while their opponent or their playing partner's hitting or something, and they're not paying attention to him. They're just like, wow, that's, there's a lot of opportunity on these spectacular ocean sites. I mean, that's the incredible thing is how different is that? And not that every place you should be sitting there just going, wow, wow, wow. You can't have that. You have to have this rhythm and flow to the site, and you have to be prescient to that, the environs that you're in, but you also need to be able to have the sort of wherewithal to observe that. And a lot of golfers don't. If they're just, I'm only worried about my game, and only worried about trying to make birdie or par or whatever, and they lose sight of that. And that doesn't necessarily mean only at 7 Mile or some other spectacular golf course, but other places. You can go to a golf course that's a tree-lined, urban golf course, and it's one of the things, like if you go to like Donald Ross golf course, he was really good at building golf courses that are constantly interesting every day. You could play for the rest of your life and enjoy that and have a really good round and stuff. But it's not necessarily jumping out at you. It's something that is just this very pleasant experience. And the thing that I find that's real interesting with his better golf courses, there's all these and like any great architect, there's all these nuanced levels of, information that you can learn, and you can't totally satiate your appreciation for that hole or that architect or that golf course, etc. And I think, that's one of the things that I learned at Crystal Downs growing up. Whether it was playing there, working on the golf course, working in the pro shop, sledding off the first tee with my kids on New Year's Day, in the snow, I was always seeing something different on the golf course. Because there's so many just levels of, bits of information. You're never totally satiated. I've been there thousands of days. I still see stuff every time I go out there. Those great golf courses have that.
The members at Royal Dublin were the beneficiaries of a cancelled connection, I think, to the USA of yours back on Captain's Day in June 2023. Your whistle-stop tour of the golf course didn't go unnoticed. Some days later, I was having lunch with a pal of mine, Cathal Connaughty, who was telling me a story. He never guessed what happened. I was out playing Captain's Day last Saturday, and there was some dude walking around the place with glasses and a pair of jeans on. He thought you were some sort of interloper. Anyway, obviously you were there, I think, as you were connecting through Dublin. I think the flight got cancelled or certainly delayed anyway. And we were very happy to welcome you down there. I know you met with Alan Hammond, our superintendent, and Jeff Allen, our general manager. So you were there predominantly to check out the recently completed bunker renovation. I'm just wondering what you encountered on your walkabout. I believe you were following players and seeing how they were getting on and whether they were avoiding the strategically placed bunkers or not, and finding enough rope to hang themselves. But what did you find on your walk around on Dollymount? I think it was the first time you'd been there. Is that right?
It is the first time I was there. Yeah, I was. It's just, good circumstance that, I did. I had a hiccup getting back from London and Amsterdam, and I missed a flight because of whatever, and so I was in Dublin overnight, and the next flight out was mid late afternoon or something. So I just immediately said, well, I could go see Royal Dublin, and I've never seen this. And Frank and Hendrik had been doing all this work, and Clates had been there before, and of course he'd been there, through the years and stuff like that. So yeah, everybody was very, very welcoming. And yeah, it was this, Captain's Day. So it was kind of this special day, and I'm just, I don't have any clubs. I'm just, I'm making my way about. And it's funny because, there was no, like, this guy's going to be coming around and, he's not going to get in your way or whatever. And people always, they respond differently, obviously. Someone might be really intent on their game, and they don't want any distractions or whatever. And I don't think I'm really distracting. I mean, I know how to stay out of people's way. I know, whatever to do, and sort of in between shots, and I can sort of get ahead, and, so I'm not following the same group for 8 holes. That's always not good. Particularly, sometimes the ladies get very, very upset. They don't want anybody to watch them. But this one time, I think I was on 13 or 14. Is it 12 or is it 13 that has the water right in front of the green? The little.
That's 10. That's 10, or it could be 14.
Yeah.
So it's 10 is index 1, the par 4 from the. Yeah, so 14 is the one you're talking about. Yeah. The raised tee with the.
Well, it was one or the other, but anyway. And so I was kind of between these two groups, and they were, one guy, he was going to lay up, and so I kind of like didn't get far enough ahead, but I didn't want to like rush people that were still working around the green and stuff. And then he was kind of,
Uh-huh.
he was sort of, and there was nobody behind him. They were playing pretty rapidly and everything. And he was sort of, and I was just gave him the wave, and it's like, yep, I'm getting out of your way. Sorry. But everybody's very friendly. It's how many, 6 years ago or so, I took I like to do these trips sometimes where I go off season. So I went to Ireland in April, 5 or 6 years ago, pre-COVID. I went by myself. My wife wasn't with me. I was over there for 18 days. I visited, I don't know, 30 or 35 courses or whatever. Basically did a loop around because I just want to look at golf courses, and it's early season. So there's golf going on, but it's not super busy. It's not the high season when everybody's, trying to get in and out, and things like that. And I'd play golf, but a lot of times I just walk golf courses. And the funny thing is, I travel a lot, and you always run into people, and traveling is difficult nowadays. And but I swear, the second that I landed until the second that I left Ireland on that trip, I didn't have one bad experience with an Irish person. Not one. I didn't run into anybody even having a marginal day that was sort of grumpy. Everybody was like, "Oh, how you doing?" They're very welcoming. And, the ultimate sort of example of that was I got into Portrush and went to Harbor Bar, of course, to get a pint.
Oh, you have to. You have to. That's just just what you do when you go to Port
the tap's only this long. It comes out nice and practically curdling out. And I hadn't made any, because it's early season. I didn't know exactly when I was going to get to Portrush if I was, stuck on something. And so I hadn't made any reservation anywhere. I figured I'll just find a place. And so I asked the bartender, and I said, can you recommend a place? Because, I'm just here for the evening, and, I'll be around, tomorrow, and then I'm going to be making my way. And he said, well, he's thinking I want the full Irish and all that breakfast. And I'm like, I just need a bed to sleep in. He says, oh, I think, so-and-so, I think she's, but I don't think she has breakfast. I'm like, that's fine. No problem. He calls up. She says, oh, well, I can't do the full Irish, So I'm like, not a problem. He leaves the bar. He's like, he could have just told me, but he leaves the bar, and he drives up, and I follow him there, and he's like, yep, there you go. Great. He even takes me to the door. She comes in, she goes, oh, I can't do the fight. I'm like, I don't need anything. That's no problem. No problem. And she's like, I've got some cereal and juice. That'd be perfect. That'd be great. Fantastic. I've been eating the full Irish every day, and I'm busy, and I'm active.
You're going to turn into a full Irish.
So I'm like, not a problem, everything. And of course I wake up the next morning, and she's got so it's me and one other person staying, and she's got the full Irish out. And I felt compelled that you have to eat everything, of course. But everybody, I swear, it was just, I can't, I've got a smile on my face right now. And every time I think about it, I'm like, bless her. She was just, it was just the sweetest thing, you could ever have.
That was really just a golf course viewing escapade, or did you get some golf in on that trip?
Oh, yeah. No, I did on my 18-day trip. Yeah. No, I played golf and just walked other ones too. So depending on the day. So, okay. But, yeah, if you're referring to the Dublin visit, the Royal Dublin visit. So I didn't have my clubs with me. I was just, because I was coming back, and so I didn't play golf. I'd never, having not been there. So I really wanted to see the work, to talk with Clates and Frank about it, and Hendrik, and give them sort of some feedback and get an understanding of what was happening and what was happening on the site. So, that was really awesome. And, spent time with the general manager and the course manager, and, and
Jeff and Alan,
looked at stuff with them. Yeah, that was
cool. Well, look, I know your egg timer is running down in terms of probably wanting to get out the door. So I've got a couple of last few questions. And as a listener yourself, you'll know my guests are asked the same two final questions. The penultimate question for today relates to the Mike DeVries bucket list. This question can be interpreted however you wish. Please let us know the circa 5 golf courses that appear on your bucket list, and tell us why.
Okay, ones that I haven't seen, you mean?
Well, ones that you have seen or haven't seen, you can interpret the question however you
Okay.
wish. So either you want to go back to them or you haven't seen them and you want to
Well,
go for
there's
the first
lots of
time.
ones that I always go back to. Um, I'll say, I'll start with the ones that I've never been to Seminole. Um,
Hmm.
and Donald Ross is I've worked on a number of his courses and things like that. I know that Corn and Crenshaw have done a restoration of it recently, but I've never been there. Would love to see that someday. And obviously, it's a great course. Ben Hogan, has raved about it. Preparation. A couple Stanley Thompson golf courses up in the Rockies, Banff and Jasper, would be ones I'd love to see. The hard part with that is that they've got more snow than we do right now. And in the middle of the summer, if I get home to, home, I like to play golf at home and not travel just to play golf in the middle of the summer. Their season's the same as mine, so that's going to be tough. But someday I hope that I do that. Um, Overseas, I'd love to get to Machrihanish. I've never made the journey down the Mulligan Tire, and that would be
And Frank's a member, isn't he?
yeah,
So
yeah,
you'd have to address
yeah.
that.
It's all Frank's fault.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Let's just blame Frank. It's your fault, Frank.
but you know, everything I've ever heard, that's a really amazing place. Would love to do that. I've never seen any golf in Japan, and Hirono is supposed to be incredible, but that's another busy sort of thing. And I haven't been in Australia. I've spent a lot of time in Australia. I've never been to Royal Adelaide, and my wife and I were slated to go to Adelaide about a year ago, and um, we're in the plane, we're on the runway in Hobart, ready to take off,
Mhm.
and then they go back to the gate, and somehow they were getting timed out and getting into Adelaide, and so they canceled that, and they were going to go through Melbourne and would have to stay overnight in Melbourne, and then go to Adelaide. It was like I was going to have we were going to have a half a day in Adelaide by the time this whole journey got fixed, and we just went back home. We canceled the trip, so I haven't been to Adelaide yet, and I really want to see Royal Adelaide because it's was impacted by Mackenzie, and
Yeah.
and I'm a huge Mackenzie fan, obviously, with Crystal Downs and all the stuff. So I'd really love to do that.
I've one up on you there insofar as I spent 6 or 7 glorious days in Adelaide playing Royal Adelaide in January 2020 before COVID kicked off. If you're ever going, you need to let me know because I need to hook you up with a mate of mine who's the international sales director for Torbreck Winery in the Barossa.
Always good stop there.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I'll give you Andrew's contact details, and he will make sure that you have an enjoyable time at the Torbreck Winery. It's we tasted everything, which was just wonderful. To be fair, the $600 or $700 bottle of wine was kind of a little bit lost on me. Everything up to that point was great.
Well, my wife doesn't play golf, amazingly. She grew up playing tennis, but I think she would be up for the wine visit too. So,
Well, hold me to that. I'm happy to share Andrew's details with you.
as far as like courses that I always enjoy returning to and stuff, those are sort of ones that I haven't seen that are really kind of on my bucket list. And also on there would be anything around Paris, Morfontaine and Chantilly. Those I'd like to see those. But then ones that I talk about, to go to that have special memories for me, that I think that are sort of under the radar for a lot of people and not necessarily for everybody. But in north central Wisconsin, there's Lawsonia. There's 2 courses there. The Links course is an old Langford and Moreau course. It's probably their preeminent work. Ron Force has done a bunch of restoration work over the years on it, and then most recently, Craig Haltom, who was involved with all the stuff at Sand Valley, has sort of done some stuff for them and manages it. That does the from afar, does the maintenance of it. It's a really amazing place. It's so good that the first time that I was there, I knew a lot about the golf course, but the first time I was there, I was with an old friend of mine who was the assistant pro at Crystal Downs when I grew up, and I was the kid in the bag room. And Mark is the pro up at Marquette Golf Club where I did gray walls, and their original golf course was Langford and Moreau. And I said, and it had been, greens had shrunk, and it was it's now, we're sort of reclaiming it now, but it was sort of a shadow of what it once was. And I said, you need to go to Lawsonia. You need to see this. Let's go down. And we were in the middle of the third fairway, and I had a 7-iron in my hand, and we're looking at these historic dairy barns right next to the hole, and this green perch with this drop off on the right and this bunker there. And my heart was pounding so fast, I physically could not pull the club back to swing it. I had to step away from the ball, and Mark was like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I feel like my heart's about to explode. I'm going to have a heart attack because this is so cool. And the same thing happened on the fourth tee. And Marcus was like, well, what, it's like, this is so amazing. Are you starting to, because he couldn't see it yet. Like, you still haven't figured out how cool, like, your old golf course is. Because everyone thought, oh, well, it's only 6,200 yards. And, it's just kind of this old pasture and blah, it's really spectacular, the original. So Lawsonia's Links is always this amazing place that I have these great memories of. And Belvedere is one of those that, we talked about earlier, which I think is really cool. Over in Scotland, Western Gales has some of that. To me, I've only been there once. This was like 25 years ago. And it was just a miserable day. It was, you want to talk about bad weather. Okay. It's low 40s temperature wise, Fahrenheit, and it's blowing sideways, raining hard. We have full rain gear on. It's coming sideways at you. And it was one of the, they're in there. They're like, you really want to go play? And I'm like, yeah, I want to go play. So we go out. Our member that was hosting us, the guy that was traveling with me, and another guy, and we get to the sixth hole, and they're telling me, about each hole and stuff as we're doing it. We're sitting up there. I hit the 1-iron down into the fairway, a 3-iron as hard as I could, another 3-iron as hard as I could, the green's sort of set in this hollow, and there's a little ridge in front, and then there's sort of there's an approach hollow. And so this ridge is between me and the pin. The pin's maybe only 15 feet on the green. And I had to, I'm sitting there in 3, and I've got to try and figure out how to get this up and down to make, on a short par 5, but the wind and the rain is really, really difficult. And I hit this little shot, goes about 12 feet past. I make the putt. I swear it's the greatest 5 I've ever had in my life. So this, it was just like, you want to talk about bad weather. it was horrible weather, and it was one of the most memorable rounds I've ever had. And, we all, we probably were the only guys that played that day. Maybe somebody else went out too, crazy like we were. But there's this thing of like, yeah, we weathered the storm. We did this. We had this great time. We were laughing, and, we got done, and parts of you were wet and parts of you stayed dry miraculously underneath your rain gear. And, the pint tastes pretty good after that, so, yeah, so those are some really great places that I find just that are really fantastic. And in Australia, I would say I always enjoy going back to Victoria Golf Club. They're a very welcoming place. They have some great dormies there that are just simple. They treat you really well. It's a fantastic golf course. Clates, of course, did the restoration there. It's super, super fun to play. I'll reserve a fifth one for some other time.
No problem. I'll have to have you back on. And you're always welcome. So the final question relates to two golf book recommendations for listeners who may be considering augmenting their personal libraries.
So many good ones. Being a Mackenzie guy, I still like his 1920 golf architecture, or sort of the expanded version on that, about St. Andrews, but the Spirit of St. Andrews. Those are great primers. There's good stories in them. They're quick reads. There's a lot of good information in there if you want. Those are really fantastic. You mentioned the Mackenzie Reader that Josh had put together. If you're really into Mackenzie, you can delve into more of that type of stuff. So I tend to like the old books, but a lot of those are coming back. And so Paul Daly's Golf Architecture series. He's a publisher, writer, compiler, who gathers essays. He's got a series of books there, and there's a lot of different stuff in there. Some of it great, some of it, maybe less interesting for certain people or whatever. But things you can pick and choose and look at stuff, and it gathers a lot of stuff, and I think they're really well done. There's good photography in them and stuff too, which is really neat. It's hard to stop it too. I don't know how you do that. My library
Keep going.
is massive.
It's a loose two.
Read? Who reads? Who actually turns pages?
Yeah, exactly.
Anymore?
I mean, correct. Well, you know what? There are a few of us Luddites out there, and just apropos, I wholeheartedly concur with your remarks regarding Paul Daly's Golf Course Architecture, A Worldwide Perspective. I've just actually received Volume 7 in the post from Mr. Daly himself, to complete, for the time being, my set of 7, which is great. And I will stick a link to his website and Josh Pettit's website in the show notes. But no, it's a loose too, Mike. If you have another few you wanna mention, far away.
Well, George Thomas's Golf Architecture in America and Robert Hunter's The Links, both from I think 1927. Those are great old texts that cover stuff. And then Simpson and Weatheridge, their tome right from around that time too is, Gary's on some other stuff is really cool. The great thing about The Links was, just to swing this back to sort of the beginning of our conversation with Crystal Downs, is Walkley Ewing, the founder of Crystal Downs. They built a 9-hole course before Mackenzie got there. And Eugene Goebel, who was a park planner in Grand Rapids, where Walkley Ewing grew up and was living at that time, he designed this rudimentary 9-hole golf course for him on what is basically the front 9, or some of the front 9, and a bit of holes 10 and 18 at Crystal Downs now. And he had this, and then he read Robert Hunter's The Links, and wrote Hunter and told him about, this place, and said, who would you recommend? Because I think we have the opportunity to do something here that's a little bit better than what we have. And Hunter wrote him back and said, well, the best is Dr. Alistair Mackenzie, and he's about to head back to England, and I think I could convince him to, see it on his journey back. And unbeknownst, I think, to Walkley Ewing, that Robert Hunter was his partner in California. He's telling him to talk to my partner. But nonetheless, that's what got Mackenzie there. So that's a great read, and, personally a favorite, and, led to my journey. So that might have to be number 1 on the list, maybe.
Was that the first one you read of the ones you mentioned?
No, Mackenzie's would have been the first one I read, but I mean, it's right up there with it. And, learning that later, just sort of the history of it and stuff, it's sort of interesting how all of this stuff is interrelated. And, it goes back to these little bits and pieces. And, if this didn't happen or that didn't happen, would my family have been going up to Crystal Lake since 1916 when my great grandfather first went up there? I wouldn't have been exposed to Crystal Downs. I wouldn't have been exposed to golf. I might be doing something totally different. Who knows? But that had a huge influence. And so thank you, Mr. Hunter, for influencing Mr. Ewing.
Indeed. And Mr. DeVries, thank you very much for your work on behalf of us golfers around the world. It very is much appreciated. Safe travels prior to your departure to Hobart on Wednesday. And I'm sure I'm speaking for all my listeners when I say we look forward to seeing those pictures drop as and when Mr. Goggin squeezes them out.
Well, thanks. It's been really fun, Shane. And you're going to have to get to Michigan to play, and you haven't been here to play. So you've got an invitation, and you need to take me up on that. That would be good fun.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. I must rectify that situation at some point, but I have to say I have to get back to Australia first, and I have to get back to Holland first, and I have to get back to the UK a few times. So after that, I promise you, I'll look you up in
So
Michigan.
many places and not enough time, right?
Well, there you go. And I need to attend the day job as well to make sure I can pay for these things as well. So would that podcasting were lucrative? It's not. Doing out of the love of it more than anything else, Mike. Listen, thank you very much for your time and safe travels on your onward travels to Australia.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Many thanks for tuning in. As usual, you can find us online at firmandfast.golf or on Twitter at firmandfastgolf. Please continue to like, subscribe, and comment. It really is appreciated. Until the next time, happy golfing.